Haha. Good
Hey,
evening, everyone. Hey,
hey.
Ron, how's it going?
Well, it's cold, but I don't think it's as cold as it is where you are hanging out
That
right now.
that's true. And well, I'm glad that you're joining us and also our audience. First off, let us know where you are from. Just put it in the comments, whether it's on Facebook or YouTube. We'd love to know where you're joining us. And we're really glad that you're here because with all this winter storm activity lately and all the delays, cancellations, I think something crazy like more than 20,000 flights have been actually canceled all across the US and Canada. A lot of people have been feeling a little anxious or a lot anxious about flying and how that's going to affect, your safety while you're flying. So if that's true for you, then this show is really for you because we're going to give you the behind the scenes look, so to speak, what's going on behind the scenes in aviation when storms occur. And then
Yeah.
we're going to obviously help you um, calm and tame your nervous system so you can feel a little bit more safe about your upcoming flight. So, Ron, why don't you let us know what you have in store for us today?
Hey, thanks, dear, and welcome everybody. And you, how much snow do you? We were talking earlier today. How much snow did you get up there?
So, 29 inches. Because we got this storm system that affected 46 of I think 46 US states, but then it also extended into Ontario and Quebec. And I think it was almost 900 miles across at some point. But then
Yeah.
because where Toronto is, we're on the northern shores of Lake Ontario. We also got a lake effect, right? So that the lake effect came from southeast, and the
Yeah.
storm came up from southwest, and it all like Toronto got what's that? Just a little over 3 feet of snow in under 24 hours. So pretty
Yeah.
exciting
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. It's let me, I wanted to just share my screen here, get this thing going.
And there we
Okay.
go.
Okay. Well, yeah, thanks again, Dieter. And tonight we're going to focus on how major storms, like the one going across the North American continent right now, how that affects the airline system as a whole, and why weather in one part of the country can ripple across the entire network. So keep in mind, we just had a huge storm, and it made the news as it should, and a lot of it made the airline news because so many people are affected when they try to fly, and there's storms that affect the system. But this also works for localized storms. So I don't think there's anything that I get more chat content from than people say, "Hey, Capt Ron, I'm getting ready to fly, and there's a thunderstorm at the airport right now. Should I be worried?" So I want you to keep that in the back of your mind, and because the things that we're going to talk about are just as relative for those as they are for major storms like we've had. So tonight I'm going to walk you through how today's airlines are interconnected and how decisions get made. Most importantly, why those decisions are rooted in safety first. And you're going to hear me talk about that more than once. Our number one priority is safety, and I've gone through 4 airlines in my career, and we have a flight operations manual, and if each and every one of those has these priorities spelled out: safety, uh, uh, co passenger comfort, and schedule. And that's the way we look at it. We never, ever compromise on safety, not intentionally, anyways. So we're also going to talk about flights that are sometimes canceled early, which is frustrating if that was one of your flights. We'll talk about with that what's happening with the crews and the aircraft during disruptions, and how if you understand more about the system, it can actually reduce anxiety instead of increase it, because that's the bottom line for why we talk about aviation the way we do here. We want to talk about it not just to let you know what's going on behind the scenes, but why you can take that to the bank and know that it's all done with your safety in mind. So before we wrap up tonight, I'll share a practical one-page handout with you that I put together. Just a little thing that has some simple coping strategies that you can use if your travel plans get changed. So you can just fold it up, put it in your purse or your pocket or something like that. Something you can keep with you the next time you fly. And as always, we'll leave time at the end for your questions and comments. So if something comes up for you as we go along, just drop it in the chat, whether you're watching us live or whether you're watching the replay. So let's get started here. Of course, we always mention the Birds of a Feather group, and this is our private Facebook community. Whether you're starting to work on your fear flying or you've already taken some big steps and you want to stay supported, this group is for you. I get a lot of people, the first thing they say to me when I have these 15-minute coaching calls is, I found you in Facebook in the Birds of a Feather group. We love to hear that, and it's a great place. It's a safe, private space filled with people who get it, people who get you, in fact. And that's what is probably one of the most comforting things, is to talk to somebody who's of a like mind, and they just aren't comfortable flying. So you'll get encouragement, expert guidance, and most importantly, you recognize you're not alone, because we call it Birds of a Feather because we all flock together to lift each other up. And so if you haven't become a member, take the next step and just sign up, join click on the link and join now, and get going with this awesome group of people. Again, if flying's been on your mind lately, especially with everything you've been seeing in the news this past week about storms and delays and cancellation, this is the right place tonight. It's not about fear-based headlines or worst-case scenarios. It's about understanding what's really happening behind the scenes and helping your nervous system calm down when travel feels uncertain. Remember, the brain doesn't like uncertainty. It has this need to understand so that it can feel more in control. And that is why the underlying discomfort for most people is a feeling of not being in control, because they're just uncertain about and don't know what's going to happen. So this is a supportive space. You don't need to tough it out or pretend you're not anxious. We talk about flying honestly, calmly, and realistically here, and we do it together. Tonight's main topic is something that's been affecting travelers all across the country this week, and Canada, of course, the whole North American continent. Even down in Phoenix, the temperatures have dropped, and we've had a little moisture. It's unseasonably cool or cold down here. So we're going to talk about why a storm in one part of the country can affect flights thousands of miles away, even when the skies look clear where you are. I can't tell you the number of times we'll be sitting at the gate, delayed, and people look out for weather, and people look outside the window and say, I don't see any weather. Well, it's because the system's interconnected. So I'll explain how airlines are interconnected, how they use hubs and crews and aircraft, how they all fit together, and why airlines sometimes cancel flights even before the weather arrives. And most importantly, we'll look at this through the lens of safety first, as I mentioned, or why these decisions are made to protect you and not inconvenience you. So let's get right into it. These major storms have, like I've said, have affected travel all across the country. I've got my stepson works as a ramper at Southwest, and I think they had 150 flights alone in Phoenix that were canceled yesterday. And we'll talk a little bit as we get into this, why we are so interconnected and why a flight cancellation in one airport affects so many other places, and why a storm in one part of the U.S. can disrupt flights thousands of miles away. Modern airlines don't operate flight by flight in isolation. They operate as a highly interconnected system. When I first went to work as a pilot back in 1978, we had roughly about half of the numbers of flights a day that we have now. So you can imagine that the changes that makes in everything related to flying. When I first flew, the airlines considered a flight with average 70% load factors. That means like if you had 100 seats and you flew on average with 70 of them full, that was full occupation. That was full participation. That meant that they were staffed for those numbers of people. Nowadays, routinely, airlines have load factors of 95% and up. So what does that tell you? That tells you that there's not much slack in the system. And airplanes, we had airplanes that actually would spend the night. We'd have extra airplanes sometimes. So if an airplane out of our hub in Denver, where I first started, if it was broken or we need to pull it out of service, oftentimes we had another one sitting at the hangar. And people in my age sometimes think in those terms. When you go to the gate and the airplane's not there, we say, well, why don't you just get another one? Well, first of all, if you're not at one of the airplane's hubs or maintenance hubs, there ain't any chance that there's going to be an airplane there. And if you're out in the middle of East Jesus, Nebraska, the airplane's definitely not going to have, or the airline's definitely not going to have an extra airplane there. So think of the system like less like individual roads and more like a living network with hubs, spokes, and aircraft rotations, crews, and passengers all moving in a carefully timed sequence. So when a major storm hits a key hub, say Washington, D.C. or Dallas or New York, something like that, where an airline has a hub, it doesn't just affect the airplanes trying to land in there in that moment. It affects where those aircraft will be later in the day, where the crews will be, and not just the airplanes, but where the crews will be and where the connecting passengers will be that can move through the system or trying to move through the system. So that's why a snowstorm on the East Coast can lead to delays or cancellations later in Phoenix or Los Angeles, even under perfectly clear skies. Now, the system is designed this way for efficiency. And part of it, admittedly, is efficiency is so the airplane can carry can carry you and your butt the longest it can and keep you on one of its airplanes. But it also means everything around it has to be efficiently operated as well. So tonight we'll pull back the curtain a bit, not to minimize your frustration that delays cause, but to help you understand instead why these decisions are made, how airlines prioritize safety first, given these disruptions, and passenger comforts second, as I mentioned, and schedules third. And we're also going to look at why disruptions during big weather events are often signs of the system doing exactly what it's designed to do under those circumstances, and that is protect people. It's not about the inconvenience that we sometimes feel. It's about keeping everybody safe, the crews and the passengers. And to really understand how this ripple effect happens, we first need to look at how airlines are actually built. And that starts with the hub and spoke system, which I alluded to before, that connects everything together. Over the past several days, we've seen a series of powerful winter storms impact large portions of the United States, from heavy snow and ice in the Midwest and the Northeast to extremely cold and secondary effects rippling all the way across the East Coast. What's the temperature been like up there, Dieter?
Oh, sorry, I was muted.
Oh, sorry.
We had some of the coldest last week. We're in the influence of what's called a polar vortex, right? Where the jet stream pushes far down, and then behind it you have all that. So I don't really, you might know this better, but we had with wind chill, we had minus 35 degrees Celsius here. So that's pretty chilly.
Yeah, that's it. And the opposite end of that is in the summer down here, we have temperatures at 120, and with the wind chill, it brings it down to 118. So anyway, I know that wasn't funny, but what the heck. So anyway,
well, I can tell you this in at Pearson, so our busiest airport in Canada. it happened to me many years ago, but it got so bad with the winds
Yeah,
that when you went through the de-icing and then you were too long on the taxi in a holding pattern, that you
yeah,
had to go again through the de-icing process. So, and that's why they had a lot of delays, even flights that weren't canceled,
yeah.
because of those really deep temperatures and a lot of wind, that created these twice de-icing, kind of
Yeah.
runs. So
And thanks for mentioning that because we're really not doing winter operations tonight. We're really talking about the system, but we
yeah,
will mention that, and that's a good point because one of the things, just since Dieter brought it up, one of the things that we have is we have a procedure for when we de-ice. It has charts in there. We give a value to how cold is it, how wet is it, what kind of moisture are we having, and then what kind of de-icing fluid are we having, and we put that all together and we get a holdover time. So as Dieter was saying, you might have, if it's really harsh conditions, you might have a holdover time that's only like 15 minutes. So if it takes you more than 50, and the time starts when they start applying the de-icing fluid. So if it takes 5 minutes to de-ice, and you had a 15-minute holdover, you're down to 10 minutes now between that and when you got to leave the ground. And so it's a lot of complication. But again, we mentioned that, one, to keep you informed, but two, to let you know that that's the detail that goes into planning for adverse weather operations there. So during these storms this week, airlines were forced to cancel. Dieter mentioned 20,000. I read a figure that says 30,000 in North America over this past week. Not because the planes can't fly in winter weather, and please don't make that connection. It has nothing to do with the snow and ice and all that stuff. There are certain conditions we simply do not fly in, but the airplanes don't really care as long as there's air going over the wings and the wings aren't contaminated with ice and things like that, which is why we de-ice. They fly. But it's because the airports, the runways, the crews, and other entire support systems have to operate within this very specific band of safety. And when snow and ice, for example, reduce runway braking action, or when de-icing, as Dieter just said, demand overwhelms the airport capacity, or the holdover times, the flights can't safely depart or arrive at their normal pace. And of course, when that happens, if you add strong winds to that, poor visibility, air traffic control restrictions, which get wrapped up in that, the system begins to slow down very quickly. And what makes these storms especially disruptive is their geographic scale. And we're talking about the major impact of scaling. And this wasn't a localized weather effect affecting one city for a few hours. These storms stretched, like Dieter said, 900,000 miles, all the way from down in the southwest of the United States up through the eastern seaboard. And
actually, the most snow I think was falling in New Mexico, so not that far from
yeah,
you.
yep,
So
yep. And because these fronts come down there and they run into that big high humidity moisture coming off the Gulf down here. So you take cold, it moves underneath the warm air, it goes up, and moisture falls out of it. So whenever things like that happen, especially on a large scale like that, the airlines lose the flexibility that they normally rely on to reroute aircraft, substitute crews, and recover schedules quickly. And I say that with a tongue in cheek because the demands on the airlines with the number of hours that those airplanes fly every day, they're taxed before just under normal operations. So when the system starts to get slow or slow down, it can have a big ripple effect in that. As a result, cancellations increase dramatically, not just in the storm zones themselves, but nationwide. As I mentioned, we'll get into more detail here. A delay or a cancellation up in the East Coast can affect the flight, that airplane, when it should have been coming out of LA later on. So, and we do cancel flights proactively to prevent aircraft and crews from becoming stranded, because if you got aircraft or crews that can't get to the aircraft, you really got problems. And so we try to avoid compounding delays later in the day by doing that, by canceling proactively. And that's one of the things that I've seen in my career, and even since my career ended. You see that a lot more often. You get proactive cancellations out there. For passengers, it sucks. It can feel sudden and frustrating, but from an operational standpoint, those decisions are made to limit the overall disruption and protect safety, and create the fastest possible path back to a stable schedule once the weather clears. And to see how those decisions ripple across the country, let's look at what happens inside a major airline hub when the storms shut them down. When we talk about the hub and spoke system, we're really talking about the backbone of modern airline operations. Now, most of the airlines out there use hub and spoke. The one asterisk is Southwest Airlines. They started and from the get-go way back in 1970 with a more point-to-point operation. So when I was with America, for example, we hub Dallas, Fort Worth, we hub Phoenix. So I might start my trip in Phoenix. I might go to Des Moines and come back to Phoenix and then end up in Seattle for the night. Seattle or Southwest, on the other hand, they might start an airplane in Phoenix, go to Orange County, go up to Oakland, go out to Denver, go out to Chicago, something like that. So they do it a little bit differently, but they still rely on that system operating with some sort of continuity and precision and consistency, so that crews can be in the right place when the airplane comes in to pick up trips and whatnot there. So every airline's hub major cities, like you take Delta, Atlanta is their big hub. They also hub Minneapolis because they purchased Northwest Airlines, and that was their hub. American, Dallas, Fort Worth, and Chicago, lots of different hubs. And you know that from if you fly on an airline and it's not a nonstop flight, if it's direct flight, typically you're going to go through the airline's hub. So aircraft don't just fly one route and stop for the day. Instead, a single airplane might fly 4, 5, or 6 different legs. When I first started flying, we had a regional airline. We had these twin propeller airplanes, turboprops that had 50 seats on them. One day, and granted this was rare, but I had 15 takeoffs and landings in one day. Holy cow, it's a bunch. But and so we had a lot of opportunity for going through the hubs on those days. So the airplanes keep moving, and the crews work the same way. Pilots and flight attendants are scheduled to operate multiple flights in sequence, often starting and ending their day in a hub city. And because we have slightly different flight rules, the pilots are more limited in the hours that we can work every day than the flight attendants are. We can't even start with the same flight attendant crew and keep them all through the day. So we're swapping crews. You may have been on a flight that you came in and you got boarded on your next flight and you're waiting for the pilots to show up. Or they said, we can't board yet because we don't have the flight attendants yet. And I encourage you, if you're out there and you've had an experience like that, put it in the chat there. And if you want us to talk about it, Dieter would be more than happy to bring it up. Or if you have specific questions, because this is really looking at a deep dive as to how involved everything is below what you see typically. So passengers, likewise, flow through the system as well. So you'll arrive from one city and connect through a hub to another flight. And just as a matter of fact, a nonstop flight is where you take off from Phoenix and you end up in Chicago. A direct flight would be you take off from Phoenix, you stop in St. Louis, and then you end up in Chicago. So those are the differences there. And if it's a direct flight, that means you can go from one flight to another hub, and you might have to get on another flight, switch airplanes in there. Which again, if you've flown it all, you know what I'm talking about there. So the structure is incredibly efficient, believe it or not, and it allows airlines to offer frequent service. It makes the airlines much more efficient. We used to joke that the hardest part about marketing is to convince you that the shortest distance from New York to Seattle is through Denver, if that was our hub. And you know what, pricing, that's one of the things that goes into it. The airlines that would fly nonstop have to price the other hub airlines that might go through Denver. So it's very complex. And of course, computers have enabled us to do much more complex fare structures and things like that. So, but that efficiency of operating hub and spoke has a trade-off, and that's interdependence. So that means everything is connected to everything else. And when everything is running smoothly, hey, the system works like a charm. But when a major hub slows down, whether it's weather, air traffic control, runway congestion, the flow of aircraft, crews, and passengers begin to back up. And a delay at one hub doesn't stay contained, as we said before. It affects every flight that was scheduled to pass through that hub later in the day. And that's why airline operations is often compared to a circulatory system in a human being. You get one major artery clogged a little bit, and the effects are felt throughout the entire body or the entire system there. To really understand why delays cascade the way they do, let's look at three things that happen simultaneously behind the scenes: aircraft positioning, crew duty limits, and passenger connections. Okay, so first, aircraft positioning. Airplanes don't live at one airport. They move continuously throughout the day, and an aircraft scheduled to depart Phoenix, for example, this afternoon, may have started its morning in Washington, D.C., and flown to Atlanta and then continued west. Now, if that airplane never leaves D.C. or leaves late because of weather, for example, it simply doesn't exist in Phoenix later in the day, or it'll exist with a huge delay. And that's not a scheduling error. That's a physical reality. Second, crew duty limits. So we can, if that airplane was late coming into Phoenix, and that the crew that's going to pick that up started earlier in the day, and they have to sit and wait on the airplane, now we get into crew duty limits sometimes. Pilots and flight attendant are governed by strict FAA rules that limit how long they can work each day. And these limits exist, obviously, to protect safety. And I watched as the industry moved to more and more conservative with crew rest, and it became very, very restricting. And again, if you've ever been out there and you were on an airplane, and I've heard horror stories. They waited for hours to get the crew. They come in there, they push back from the gate. They have another delay of 15 minutes. And the crew says, sorry, folks, we're out of time. You go back to the gate and start all over again. It can be very frustrating. But that's because of the interdependence from all these things. So if a crew is delayed on the ground for hours, as I talked about, waiting for the weather to clear, they may legally time out and be unable to fly, not physically, but because of the crew duty limitations, even if the airplane's ready to go. And part of the crew may time out. You may have the flight attendants that time out, and the pilots they're ready to go, but now you got to get new flight attendants in. And if that happens at a hub, oftentimes it'll be a domicile for the crews, so it will mean you're more likely to get a replacement. If it happens at a remote station, sometimes that's going to end the day for the entire crew because they can't get anybody up there in time. So when that happens, the flight can't depart until a rested legal crew is available. And the last one is, of course, missed connections. And passengers, crews, and even bags are scheduled to connect through hubs, and it's in a carefully timed sequence. That's why when you buy it or when you connect with another flight, even if it's a direct flight, but you're going to Chicago, you're going to connect with another airplane and have to switch it at an intermediate stop. And if that flight if your flight's delayed, you may miss the connection depending on the system. So there's an organization in each airline called dispatch, and those are the folks and load management. Those are the folks that I think do the bulk of the work trying to figure all this out. Yeah, so when one incoming flight is late or canceled, as I mentioned, those connections unravel, and passengers miss outbound flights. Crews can be stranded away from their next assignment, and the aircraft sits idle, waiting for a system to reset. And when these three factors overlap, where you got missing aircraft, unavailable crews, and broken connections, the delays can multiply quickly. And that's why we're going to talk about proactiveness on the airlines and how that can improve things. So one canceled flight doesn't just affect the next leg; it affects every flight that depended on the aircraft that aircraft later in the day. So it starts this ripple effect across the whole system, and it can grow just within hours. Okay, when we talk about delays and cancellations, it's important to remember that these aren't just operational issues. They deeply affect you all out there, as if I were telling you something that you didn't understand. And emotionally, travel disruptions can be exhausting, regardless of whether you have anxiety about flying or not. You get anxious, frustrated, or overwhelmed, especially when the plans fall apart unexpectedly. For people who already struggle with anxiety, and particularly a fear of flying, uncertainty, which I touched on before, is what amplifies the stretch. Not knowing when you'll get home, whether you'll even get home that night, whether you'll make an important event, or how long the disruption will last, can feel just incredibly unsettling. And logistically, disruptions create a domino effect. You miss a connection, it means missed hotel check-ins, rental cars that are no longer reserved for you, they expire, and at least the guarantee, and a lot of your carefully coordinated plans that completely unravel. Add to it, if you're traveling with children, elderly people, medical needs, even greater challenges when the system starts to falter. And something as simple as an overnight delay can turn into a complicated puzzle involving where you're going to eat, where you're going to stay, what are you going to do for the kids who are now screaming by that point because they're exhausted. And financially, while airplanes typically rebook or refund during weather events, and that depends on the rules, and you have to know the rules there. Typically, if you come in, if the airline was delayed through no fault of your own, and it's not your original departure, typically there's some compensation in there, but not always. And that may mean you still have to get your own credit card out and pay it and get reimbursed or something down the road. But it causes a big hassle. And again, I know I'm not telling most of you anything about that. And even when the airlines do everything right, the ripple effects of disruption can still be costly for travelers. The impacts are real and they matter. And at the same time, understanding why these disruptions occur can help reduce the sense that they're arbitrary or careless. I know I talk to people that, because I'm a pilot, they talk to me about their missed adventures and whatnot. And it's harder on people that believe in conspiracies because they're convinced that this was something that was designed just to ruin their day, but it's not. I have been through a lot of delays in my career as a pilot, and I know that these things happen. And here's a few strong options depending on what your experience is. So when airlines face widespread disruption, the decisions that they make are guided by very specific priorities, and those are, I mentioned again, there's safety, schedule, or safety, comfort, and schedule in that order. So let's look at the priorities there. So when disruptions occur, whether it's from storms or air traffic control congestion or whatever, the airlines fall back on a very clear decision-making hierarchy to remove emotion, pressure, and guesswork from the people who, not just the passengers, but from the flight crews primarily, and the people on the ramps working the flights. And the first and most important priority is always safety. And I mean this from the bottom of my heart. The safety of passengers, flight crews, and aircraft, and everyone involved, are based on hard data, weather forecasts, runway conditions, crew limits, crew fatigue, air traffic control restrictions. And if any one of those elements fall outside acceptable safety margins, the way that we're built by default is to delay or cancel. No scheduled revenue goal. I know people think about that, think that we do things to save money. We do things to save money, but only after we consider the impact on safety. The second priority is your comfort and well-being. And this often gets overlooked because it's just flat miserable sometimes to spend time in an airport or spend time on an airplane waiting to take off. But the airlines consider whether a flight would expose passengers to unnecessary stress. And you all probably are still old enough to remember when there were a couple of incidents, one in Detroit with Northwest Airlines and one in Kennedy with JetBlue years ago, where and in fairness to the airlines, there wasn't much they could do with it. They had too many airplanes on the ground and no jetway space, and airplanes got stuck out there. People got stuck out on the ramps for hours, and so now that the Congress passed a law that says if you're out there more than, let me get my figures right, I think it's 3 hours, which is still a long time, but they have to. The airlines will end up paying compensation. And take the optimistic look out of your face. You don't get the money. It goes to the FAA if they keep somebody on board too long like that. The third priority, of course, is restoring the schedule, but that happens after we look at safety, we look at passenger comfort, and then we look at getting the airline back running in the way it was supposed to. And in many cases, short-term cancellations are necessary to prevent even larger disruptions later. The goal isn't just to get one flight out, it's to restore the entire system efficiently and safely as possible. And that's why you can imagine that sometimes you're looking at kind of a close-in view of the system, and the dispatchers are looking at a bigger system. And so you might look and see why one airplane goes and yours gets stuck there, but they're looking at things down the road, like where the airplane's got to be, or where next, or where the crews are going to be, or whether they have more passengers, because we do try to disrupt fewer people than more people in that. So as this priority structure explains why airlines often cancel flights before the weather even arrives. And that's why we want to look at real quickly here why flights are canceled early. And one of the most common questions that passengers ask me is, why was my flight canceled when the weather wasn't bad yet? And again, we don't have a view of the big picture. And so it's a really fair question. And the answer is that airlines don't operate reactively. At least they try not to. They operate proactively. And modern airline decision-making is based on forecasts, something called modeling and risk management, not just what conditions look like at the moment there. So when a major storm is forecast, as this one was, the airlines look ahead at how the storm will affect runways, the visibility, the winds, the de-icing capability, as Dieter touched on earlier, the air traffic flow, and crew availability, not just for one flight, but for the entire system over many hours or even days. And that's what's been going on behind the surfaces here. Because when I was new in the airlines, oh man, fuel prices had not gotten crazy at that point in time. And what we typically did, we put extra fuel on and we would hold en route. Then finally, the air traffic control system got a handle on this, so that now we have this air traffic control center, route control center in Washington, D.C., and it's looking at the system nationwide and even international flights. And what they do then is they make it so that we can always, 99.9% of the time, we take our delays on the ground at the gate. And you may have been affected by that at some point in time. You get on board the airplane and they say, folks, we just found out we got a flow time for our flight going into LA. We're going to sit here for such and such. Or sometimes it'll happen when you're on the taxiway on the way out. And if it's not too long, we'll take the delay on the taxiway out there, wait for our turn to get airborne. If it's too long, we'll go back to the gate rather than burn fuel. And for those of you who say that if we have a delay and it wasn't forecast, that equals the airplane's is somehow more dangerous, just get that out of your head. Oftentimes it's something like this. It's aircraft flow. So, and if the airlines didn't, if they waited to react later, an aircraft could become stranded at airports that are closing because there's curfews at airports like Orange County. So that plays a factor as well. So they look at where they're needed next and where passengers could end up stuck on board airplanes or in terminals with no available recovery options. And by canceling early, the airlines keep the aircraft and the crews out of harm's way and preserve flexibility to restart operations more quickly once things do break up and get better. And this is a classic example of aviation safety culture. The goal isn't to see how close we can get to the edge. It's to stay as far away from the edge as we can. And I hope that if nothing else, you'll remember that tonight. So canceling early is the thing. So after the storm passes, okay, conditions begin to improve. There's an immediate shift into the recovery mode, and that's when we place where there's a tremendous amount of behind the scenes work, both what has gone on and what's going on currently, beginning to take place there. And the first step is repositioning the aircraft. During disruption, we get airplanes in the wrong places. So the first thing is to get the airplanes back in the right place. Another thing, this is kind of collateral, but it goes on in there. Airplanes are on a very tight schedule, such that we send airplanes to maintenance based on the number of cycles they have and the number of hours on the airframe. So if your flight came in and it was canceled and they put you on another airplane, that airplane wasn't supposed to fly that way. So I've always been amazed when you look behind the scenes at how maintenance control gets those airplanes back in the flow that they're supposed to be in, so they don't all end up running out of time. And now I got to send 15 of my airplanes to overhaul at the same time, and I don't have anything to sell tickets on. But that's a big part of it as well. So the airlines carefully move the aircraft back into the right place so that the schedule can function again. And sometimes, it might sound weird, you might see an airplane leave with nobody on it except the crew, and that's called deadheading. But it's when we had to move that airplane to where it needs to be in the morning. And you'll see sometimes, if you could, like I've come back from Burbank on the last flight to Phoenix, sometimes there'll only be 20 people on board the airplane, and worst cases, and that's because that airplane, it needs to be in Phoenix the next morning. And so marketing just they sell whatever tickets they can, but they put it back in place for the morning. And that brings me up to one point I wanted to talk about. One of the ways you can help yourself to some degree of ability, and that is if you're flying out of like Phoenix, for example, and it's a hub. It's likely if you schedule the earliest flights out in the morning to somewhere, it's likely that no matter what happened the day before, if that airplane made it in that night, it'll leave on time. However, if that airplane is coming into Atlanta later in the day and you get there in the afternoon and it was delayed all there, you're more susceptible to disruptions in the system. So.
And that is very, very true, because I remember, even coming down from Buffalo to Phoenix and going either through Charlotte or, one of the American airline hubs. This is really where it can bunch up if you fly later in the day versus early in the day. Couple of comments and questions. So Sandra says, I want to fly everywhere direct. I don't really, it makes her nervous, to have connecting flights.
Right.
And the reality is some destinations or many destinations, you actually have to have connecting flights. And there were a couple of questions about what happens with cancellations, whether you get your money back or not. I don't know that we're really qualified to answer that, but maybe you know a little bit more. I know that in Canada we're having a lot stronger, I guess, passenger rights than in the US. So it is possible. Somebody mentioned that they didn't get reimbursed. And then there's another question: why make people sit at the gate in the plane for so long? Why not let them off the plane? And I'll let you answer, but I can tell you, sometimes I get into an airport ahead of time, and you think, oh my God, the opposite is true. We actually arrived early, and then there's no gate for that aircraft because everything is on such a tight schedule. But maybe you can actually speak to that a little
Yeah, no,
bit.
you're right on, Dieter. That's one of the biggest changes I saw in from the beginning of my career to the end. The utilization on the airplanes and the gates was so much higher, so many more flights on a given day that we and in those old days, you know, you'd come in from Boston to Phoenix and you didn't have the winds. You're going to think, man, you get there 20 minutes sometimes, 25 minutes early, and you get to the gate. Now you can just bet if you're early, you're going to sit parked on the ramp waiting for the gate to open up because that gate is scheduled to leave about 5 minutes before you're there because the utilization on those gates is like the utilization of airplanes. You pay rent on the gate at the airport, and whether you use it or not, you pay the rent. So the more you use it, the more efficient it is. But that's exactly right. And we hate to do that, but it's just what happens. So it's inevitable sometimes. So the last thing on the as far as recovery is, or the second thing I should say is getting the crews back online. So like the airplanes, you have crews that are out of position, and now and the same thing that kind of like an airplane, they only got so much time they can use in a day, be at work in a day, so much time they can work during a month. And so what happens is you got to get them back in position, and then you got to modify that and do that. So you got the same kind of problem with the crews you do on that. And then the last thing is or I shouldn't say the last thing, but simultaneously, the airlines are focusing on rebooking passengers. And I know this gets to be one of the most frustrating systems there, or things about it there. So, and generally the airlines try to get the people moving who have been delayed the longest. But you know, you can have isolated cases where you come to the airport and the flight going to Dallas is delayed, and they get another airplane, and now you come in. You were supposed to be on the next flight to Dallas, and you sit there, and they didn't have a place. You don't just move up to the flight in front of you because there were people who paid for tickets there. So that's one of the most frustrating things I think that can happen is when you say, well, how come I can't get on that one now? It's because there's somebody else that didn't get on before. So, and this is why recovery can take time. Airlines aren't just restarting flights. They're rebuilding a complex independent system, really from scratch when you get a big delay like that. And again, it speaks to what we talked about earlier, why the airlines are now much more proactively looking to cancel flights in advance to make their problem solving a lot less impactful. Okay, so knowing how recovery works can help you make smarter choices when things stabilize. And if you got questions about that, feel free to ask us because we're more than that. So what can you do?
One of the questions, I think you answered that kind of like all throughout, but the question really has to do with getting all these planes back on track. You know, isn't along with all the connecting flights, isn't that introducing elements of potential, you know, risk or safety, you know, like how that's a concern that somebody voiced. And one of the things that I can speak to there is the system is often not even all that kind to the crews because it's so efficient that it literally has the safety first and then whether or not it's gonna be good for a crew. And I know you know, when Diane was still flying, we heard that a couple of times that, you know, the safety that the planes get all their safety checks and everything is factored in, and all this runs on crazy big computer systems. So I don't know if you want to say anything else. I mean,
but the only thing I can add, Dieter, is when you have a big challenge to the operation like that, in dispatch, there is a place where they bring in people from scheduling, from crew scheduling. They bring in people from maintenance control, and they bring in the dispatchers, and they sit there. So they've got specialists in each one of the areas that they're going to need to make some decisions, to talk about that and to prioritize and bring up human factors and some common sense. So, because it isn't always automatically done by a computer. Sometimes it takes somebody to say, hey, wait a minute, does that make sense to do that over here? And of course they make mistakes from time to time, but it is, I think, the most important thing to stick with is it's the bottom line is safety. And it's gotten tighter, much tighter in terms of the crew limits and things like that over the years since I first started out there. So what can you do as a passenger? Stay informed, but don't obsess. Easy to say for somebody who suffers from obsessive compulsive thought loops, but that is the thing. Try to one of the best things you can do is use the airline's app. I'm finding in all the other areas of life, I got a new healthcare system this year, and I was trying to log into it, and finally I called them up and they said, just use the app. It's so much easier typically. And I'm not one of those youngsters that learned how to do all that. So I'm a little bit more reluctant to use the app. But that is, I've seen in my own personal life, just using an airline's app is much easier sometimes and more timely in the information. Second, pack and plan for flexibility. Wow, how do you do that? Well, you kind of sit back, take a look. But the main things that are essential is to keep in your carry-on any medications you have, chargers that you might need to keep your electronics going, change of clothes, snacks. I always carried a shaving kit with me so that at the very least I can get to the hotel and clean up without too much trouble. And any other things that help you feel physically more comfortable. So when disruptions occur, having what you need nearby gives you a feeling of a sense of control. Does that sound familiar? That's what we're looking for. We're looking to feel more in control. And the last thing is third, you build up mental coping tools. And this is where some of the mindfulness things that we talk about do in visualizations and audio. Delays trigger stress, especially if you're already an anxious flyer. And you can use simple grounding techniques like just taking a breath, sit back, find yourself a place in the airport that you can get away from some of all the noise and stuff like that, and relax as much as you can. And hopefully, if you brought something with you on board to watch that you downloaded off of Netflix or something, it can make the time go a lot faster. I know I've used that as well. Fourth, think one step ahead, not 10. Don't get ahead of yourself. Instead of catastrophizing about everything that might go wrong, focus on the next step that makes sense to you. Check on rebooking, find a gate agent, and be patient with the gate agents. I can tell you, watching years and years of interactions between frustrated passengers and the gate agents, the ones that say you get more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. The ones that treat people with respect that often end up, and try not to personalize when you get agents that are overwhelmed. It's a tough job. And the last thing, remember the big picture. Widespread disruptions are not personal failures, and it's not airline indifference. It might seem like it sometime, but it's just a limitation on the system, and it's definitely not a sign that something's unsafe. And given what we've talked about tonight, to try to impact you or your memory on that, remember that the number one priority is safety. So the goal during disruptions isn't perfection, it's steadiness. So and this brings us back to the most important takeaway of all, and that is the big picture. So what do you want to do? What do you want to remember? The airline system today is incredibly interconnected. It's safe, but it's interconnected. Planes, crews, airports, air traffic control, they're all part of one massive living system. And when something disrupts even one part of that system, it's like a mobile. If you touch one part of the mobile over here, it causes other parts of it to move as well. And things like major storms can affect that, and the effects of that can ripple far beyond where the weather actually is. But this is the part I really want you to hold on to, and that is the interconnectedness is not a weakness. As I mentioned before, it's a sign of coordination. It's a sign of communication. And most importantly, it's a sign that safety is being actively protected, not ignored. The most frustrating times I've ever been through, I was never forced to take airplanes that were not ready mechanically or were not ready to go. And I've never been forced to fly if I was tired, regardless of whether I was up against the duty limits or not. And most of the time, flights are delayed or canceled. It's not because something's gone wrong. Most of the time, it's because something has gone right. The airlines are on it proactively, and they're making decisions that might be inconvenient in the short term, but in the long term, it's going to be better off for the majority of people involved there. And they're made early, conservatively, and deliberately to keep airplanes out of unsafe conditions and to protect the crews from fatigue and spare you from being stranded in the air or on the ground without options. And again, the priority is safety, comfort, and schedule. And that is the way we do it. So Dieter is going to put this, I think, in the notes afterwards. Dieter, we've got a link to this. That's just a little
I'm gonna
handout.
put it, yeah, I'm gonna put it in the comments. And so it's a link to Google Doc or
Yeah.
yeah,
It's
in
just
Google.
something you maybe, if nothing else, it'll trigger your memory that, oh, I remember Capt Ron and Dieter talking about that. So we hope anyway. And as we wrap up, I just want to say thanks for spending your part of your evening here with us. It's always a joy for Dieter and I to be able to talk with you. And if flying has been feeling stressful or uncertain, particularly this week, I hope that we gave you just a little bit more understanding and maybe even a little more calm, because that's really what we're about. We're trying to get you to learn how to relax a little bit more. And remember, delays and cancellations aren't signs that something's wrong. They're signs that safety is king, and people are doing exactly what they're supposed to do under those circumstances. So you don't have to feel fearless overnight. Remember that. Confidence grows one step at a time, one flight at a time. And just showing up for this conversation is part of that process. So if you want to keep this momentum going, I invite you to take one small step for yourself, something that you can hang your head on and say, I'm still moving forward. And for many of you, that might be a free 15-minute coaching session. We'll put the link in there to do that. There's no pressure. There's no commitment. It's just a chance to talk about your flying concerns. I love doing them. I love the interaction with people. You keep me honest and you keep me learning. And most of all, I give you a little personalized guidance about how to determine what the next step is there for you. So once
Or I
again,
know Ron
yeah,
hasn't mentioned it
yeah.
today, um, but we do have now our flight anxiety profile survey.
Oh,
So if
yes.
nothing else, this will give you a lot of really actionable, and I'm hoping also insight into not only your flight anxiety type or types, I should actually say,
Yeah.
but also how anxiety shows up for you, and what to do about it. So this is for some of you, this might be a perfect start, and then maybe schedule a 15-minute coaching call to follow up with Capt Ron about your results and go even deeper into that.
Yeah, we think it's gonna be make a difference for people to get a more concrete picture of what they have. The beta group that we did toward the end of the year, they said two things about it. One, yes, it was insightful. It helped them, and they felt like it captured what their issues were about flying, and it takes about 5 minutes to do it. And the other thing which was really cool is most of the people, of course, were clients. And so we asked them to take it as a favor to us, and they were able to what their experience had been like and how some of those things helped they experienced it in their improvement with their fear flying. So that's a pretty strong recommendation, and we'd love to get your feedback on it. So go out there, take it. It's free, and hopefully it'll help you move forward there. So, all right. Thanks, Dieter. We'll be back next week and every week for that matter, right here on Fearless Fight Live. And where hopefully you'll continue to learn, talk, and support each other. all of us together supporting one another. So thanks for being a part of the community, and thanks for showing up for yourself. So we'll see you next week. Have a great night, everybody.